Welcome to session 11. I apologize that my voice is a little bit husky and honking. I've got some laryngitis clearly, but I'll do my best to get through our presentation for today, and hopefully your audio on your computers will be very forgiving. So tonight's session is about bibliographic control, which we'll define and explore, and then we'll delve a little deeper into Ferber and RDA as they pertain to bibliographic control. We've really been leading up to or dancing around, even flirting with bibliographic control all semester. 670 is the organization of information. Bibliographic control is also the organization of information. Bibliographic control, as the name applies, is concerned with bibliographic entities, books, and other types of publications. The things that are traditionally held in a library or archive. In the information age, LBSC 670 tends to go broader than just bibliographic control because the universe of information and the types of information has broadened. But whether information is being organized in libraries and archives, or in databases or corporations or on the open web, the same underlying principles apply. So today, we're going to look at some of the principles we've been thinking about all semester and how they apply in the more traditional settings. Some of those principles are creation of metadata, because bibliographic control gets very specific about how metadata elements should be constructed. Authority control, which is the aspect of bibliographic control that deals with controlled vocabulary to control single concepts with multiple synonyms, and for ambiguous terms that might refer to two or more different concepts. Ultimately, we're looking at these things with an eye toward access, because access is what the user needs to accomplish in order to move toward satisfaction of the information need. So looking at our topics for tonight then, all of which you should have some introduction to from the readings, bibliographic control involves organizing information in general, as we'll see over the next few slides. Ferber, which stands for Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records, is a conceptual system for thinking about and describing how bibliographic entities can be related to each other. Then, RDA is a specific resource. It's a written procedure that provides standards and instructions for cataloging. You do bibliographic control by using RDA, and Ferber fits in because RDA is a relatively new standard that incorporates the conceptual system that was described in Ferber. So that's sort of the big picture of everything we're going to get into this session. It might help to come back later and listen to this slide over again, or revisit the big picture after we go through all of the details. But now, we move on. So here's a long but quite good definition of bibliographic control from the online dictionary for LIS. Bibliographic control is a broad term encompassing all the activities involved in creating, organizing, managing, and maintaining the file of bibliographic records representing the items held in a library or archival collection, or the sources listed in an index or database to facilitate access to the information contained in them. Bibliographic control includes the standardization of bibliographic description and subject access by means of uniform catalog code, classification systems, name authorities, and preferred headings. The creation and maintenance of catalogs, union lists, and finding aids, and the provision of physical access to the items in the collection. Now, there are a few things that I want to emphasize in this definition. It says that bibliographic control encompasses all the activities for creating, maintaining, etc., the file of bibliographic records that represent items held in the library. Notice that I italicized bibliographic records there. Primary activity is that when we do bibliographic control, we are creating and maintaining and managing bibliographic records. we're not working with the items themselves. We're working with the bibliographic records that represent the items. By doing so, to an extent, we are managing and providing access to the items held in a library or archive. It's a fine but important distinction. Bibliographic control is concerned with surrogate records, which, as we learned way back in session 4 on metadata, are records created that contain metadata, and the creation of those records is guided by a metadata schema. A metadata schema will tell you which elements to include and in what order, and your tools for bibliographic control will tell you in excruciating detail how to properly fill out those individual elements to promote access through consistency, systematicity, and vocabulary control. Now let's move along to the middle sentence of the definition. Bibliographic control includes, number 1, the standardization of bibliographic description, and number 2, subject access. Standardization of bibliographic description gets at what I was just saying with making sure that elements are filled out properly according to whatever rules are being used. Tonight, the set of rules we'll learn about are described in RDA. These rules are what we were referring to earlier this semester as content standards. Now, the other type of description involved in that middle sentence is subject access, which to me, and I think many others in the cataloging world, is one of the most interesting aspects of cataloging and bibliographic control. How do we assess and document what a resource is about? We'll just get our toes wet with aboutness tonight. Then we'll look at it a bit more deeply next week when we talk about indexing languages and thesauri, which are your aboutness vocabularies, if you will. Then, after Thanksgiving break, you'll get your hands into different tools for assessing and describing aboutness in our cataloging lab. Suffice it to say here that when you're doing bibliographic control, you are concerned with all descriptive elements and access points for an information resource. Those that describe and identify the resource, like the title, publisher, creator, ISBN, and those that characterize what the resource is about. So that's the gist of what bibliographic control is. Now let's move on and see what some of the activities of bibliographic control are and what kinds of personnel take care of those activities in a library. Somewhere in the first couple of chapters of your textbook, Taylor and Jowdery list the 6 activities of bibliographic control. Is this list definitive? Certainly not. But it gives us a good place to start a conversation at a more concrete level of what types of activities fill the hefty bill that was described in the definition on the previous slide. So, reading through these, we see the first activity is identifying the existence of information resources. Well, that makes sense. You can't add something to your collection if you don't know it exists. Number 2, identifying works or resources contained within information resources. So, for a journal that your library subscribes to, does cataloging need to be done at the level of individual articles? Probably not these days, since most journal publishers sell their article metadata to a database vendor. But you might notice that in some libraries, chapters from books are listed in bibliographic records, while in other libraries, chapters are not. Or maybe within the same library, some books have the chapters listed and other books do not. Permutations like that are much more commonly the fodder of today's librarians. The organization, the library, has to decide whether or not to go there with their cataloging. It might be appreciated by patrons to have some deeper description, but is it worth the significant additional cost in time and effort to go to that level? The answer might be yes for some types of resources and no for others. My husband and I like to borrow DVDs of Breaking Bad from the Prince George's County Library. There, they list in the metadata records the names of individual episodes. And I often wonder, how useful is this really? However, and my answer is that I don't think it's very useful, but that's neither here nor there. However, the chapter headings of a book about, say, a history of political unrest in the Middle East, a list of those chapter headings might be hugely helpful in the bibliographic record, since it's doubtful that any one resource can cover all of the history of political unrest in the Middle East. Reading chapter headings might help someone who is trying to do research in this area. It might help them pinpoint which resources might or might not be helpful to their information need. So moving on to number 3 on the slide. Let's see, we have systematically gathering information resources into collections. What does a particular, where does a particular resource fit into the overall collection? Which department should it go to? For our Middle East book, do we send it to the catalogers in the humanities department, which includes history, or in the social sciences department, which includes government and politics and geography? Or for an archives example, let's think about the University of California at Santa Cruz, which relatively recently took custody of the archives of the Grateful Dead. How to organize this huge volume of rare and primary materials? By type of information, chronologically, by band member. Moving along, I think numbers 4 and 5 kind of go together, with number 4 being systematically preparing lists of information resources, and number 5 being creating access points for these information resources. Again, in the age of computers and the ability of computers and databases to sort information any way you want it, once we do number 5, the list described in number 4 can be created by running a simple database query. Now, number 6 is providing means of locating the information resource. How does one get from the bibliographic record to the actual item? If it's a digital resource, it might just be a matter of providing a link. But if it's a physical resource, this is where assigning call numbers and then affiliating the call number or other location information in the bibliographic record.